Let's move on and let's talk about what collective disunity looks like. Because this is where it's not just one person opposing another, but it's actually groups that stand opposed one to another. Go to the book of Joshua in chapter 22. This is a very interesting situation where the Israelites, of course, have wandered around in the wilderness, and they put in their 40 years because of their lack of faith, and now it's time to go into the promised land. And so certainly this would be an exciting time, wouldn't it? 40 years is a long time to wander around in the desert. And so the tribes are getting ready to go across, except the backstory is that there's 2.5 tribes that have actually found kind of a nice, comfortable place on the east side of the Jordan. It's the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And so back in Moses' day, they said to Moses, tell you what, we kind of like it here. How about we stay here and everybody else goes into the promised land? And Moses about lost his mind. He's like, are you kidding me? This is what got us in trouble before. Everybody sticks together. And so the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh basically said, okay, you're right. Tell you what, we'll go over and fight with everybody else. But after the promised land is settled, can we come back to the east side? Because the pastures are nice, our families are happy, our livestock likes to graze over there. Can't we just do that? And Moses made the agreement. He said, okay, we'll let you do that. So that's what happened. The majority of the Israelites went into the promised land. Reubenites, Gadites, half-tribe of Manasseh came back over. Joshua chapter 22, starting in verse 9, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh in Canaan to return to Gilead, their own land, which they had acquired in accordance with the command of the Lord through Moses. When they came to Gilead, in verse 10, near the Jordan, in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built the altar on the border of Canaan in Gilead near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. You see, the Jordan River became a boundary. And these were blood brothers. But half of them stayed on one side, not half of them. 2.5 tribes stayed on one side, and the rest went into the promised land. And then the ones that went into the promised land looked over the river, and they saw a giant altar. And they're like, oh my goodness, they've already fallen away. They've gone off into the world. They've given themselves over to foreign gods. We need to go to war and wipe them out because of their apostasy. You see, one group became pitted against another. Stay in chapter 22 and go to verse 24. We're actually starting in verse 21. This accusation goes out, and the Israelites are about to go to war with their brothers. And in verse 21 it says, then Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel, the mighty one, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord, he knows. And let Israel know. If this has been in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us to this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us into account. Verse 24, no, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord made the Jordan a boundary between us and you Reubenites and Gadites. You have no share in the Lord. Your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. And that is why we said, let us get ready to build an altar, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it's to be a witness between us and you, the generations that follow, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. Then in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to ours, you have no share in the Lord. Do you see what happened? There was separation. There was poor communication. There was misunderstanding. There was assumptions being made. There was mob mentality. Things got out of hand. Things were being said. One group was looking down on another group. Nobody was talking to the group. They were just making assumptions about the group. And that's what happens when we have collective disunity. We begin to think things about another group. You hear about maybe a Bible talk in the fellowship. They're trying something new. Oh, no. Maybe that's dangerous. What are they doing? Maybe they've fallen away. Well, let's hold off a minute. Let's engage in some conversations. Let's discuss what's going on. Let's not jump to conclusions. When we do, we get collective disunity. You know, in the ICOC, we will always be discussing issues. That's okay. In our family of churches all around the world, there's plenty of things to talk about. You know, 2-3 years ago, we were talking a lot about diversity in the United States because there was a social issue going on. Black Lives Matter was kind of the banner that got some things stirred up in our country, and people started talking about it, and it was coming into the church, and so we needed to figure out how to navigate it. We needed to get the communication started. We needed to resolve any conflicts that were starting to build there. That's okay. That's a whole lot better than one group not talking to another. That's a whole lot better than making assumptions without having good information. And we see that's what happened with those Israelites. You know, once again, in the United States, we have an election year coming up in 2020. We're not going to talk politics here, that's for sure. But I did talk to the leadership in Philadelphia, and I said, guys, we've got to get ready now. This is 2019, but before we know it, there's going to be a lot of stuff in the media. There's going to be a lot of opinions about presidential candidates and what's being said, and the whole thing's been crazy. Even it not being an election year, it's going to get off the charts crazy in 2020. We've got to get ready because there can be collective disunity. There can be a separation, people choosing sides and assuming things about another group. And we can't have that in the church. You know, just recently, even around the world, I'm sure that India has been affected as well. The issue of the women's role has come up. And, you know, the world, once again, the Me Too movement in the world, that's brought up some questions. But it's also brought up some questions within our fellowship. How do we look at women's role? What is right? What does culture have to do with that? How is that different in America than, say, in India? These are things we need to talk about. But if we're not careful, we can run ahead. Churches can say, hey, we've got it all figured out. This is what we're going to do, but they actually can put a stumbling block in someone else's path. That's why we have, for example, the Teachers Service Committee. These are incredibly smart biblical scholars. And what we're saying is, hey, let's everybody take a breath. Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's let the teachers do some serious study scripturally, and then we can make an educated and collective decision about that. You know, I've got another statement from the Elder Service Committee that's along these lines, and I'll just read a portion of this. But this was sent out also in San Diego, and basically a warning that we need to be careful to not cause collective disunity. It says, number one, if we begin to depart from what would be considered standard practices in our fellowship, we would pause and engage other church leaders in our region and beyond regarding these practices to see if it could cause a stumbling block or difficulty with another congregation. Number two, if we do experiment with new ideas, we ask that you refrain from publishing or streaming these ideas until we can gain some consensus beyond the local church. The Teacher Service Committee is in place to study the scriptures in difficult areas and help us navigate collectively what our next steps should be. And then number three, if we hear of a congregation or leaders in various churches that seem to have deviated from what we would consider a common practice, let us not assume the worst. Remember the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh. But let us not be drawn into gossip. Rather, let us contact that church or leader directly and allow the process of proper study and application be played out by the various leadership teams that are in place in the ICOC. There's a way to deal with unity even when it comes to bigger groups. We don't have to be disunified in terms of our collective groups. We don't have to just assume that group is bad, this group is good. That group is wrong, this group is right. Let's pull together and figure out what our next steps should be.